Well, hello, my friends. We are together on a Friday because tonight is Devil's Night. And I just realized that there's a picture back there that kind of gives me horns. So I am really excited to be with you guys tonight. Oh, good. The color on the computer looks better than the color on my phone. So that is awesome. Looks like Cheryl just popped in. Yay. Hello. Let me give you a little wave. Yay, I'm so glad you're here. So we're going to continue with Frankenstein because A, it was getting really good last Saturday, and B, because I want to be able to finish it tomorrow on Halloween. I know I'm a little early, but we did have costumes yesterday and today at work for the evening classes last night, and then our daytime classes today. So thank you. This is, you guys know I love any excuse to dress up. It's what I said to Charles this morning. So yeah, anytime I get to do full-on makeup and wear the stuff I would love to wear every day is a good day for me. So Jason says hello. Hello, Mac. I hope you're feeling better. You haven't got the crud, do you, Cheryl? You're staying away from him. You're like passing him food under the door, whatever, or just making him, I don't know, eat soup straight out of the can. That's what I do. But I'm not very nice. So we're going to continue on. We're on part 3. At the end of part 2, the creature had told his story to the good doctor. I don't know if he's a good doctor, but to Dr. Frankenstein, and had made a special request. So I have my drink. It is, what is this? Well, vodka, because of course it is. And like Kool-Aid mix and Mountain Dew. So trying to stay up a little while tonight. Yeah, so I hope you have a beverage. And we will get started with part 3. The being finished speaking, and fixed his looks upon me in expectation of a reply. But I was bewildered, perplexed, and unable to arrange my ideas sufficiently to understand the full extent of his proposition. He continued, "You must create a female for me. This you alone can do. This I demand of you, and you must not refuse." The latter part of his tale had kindled anew in me the anger that had died away while he narrated his peaceful life among the cottagers, and as he said this, I could no longer suppress the rage that burned within me. "I do refuse it," I replied, "and no torture shall ever extort a consent from me. Shall I create another like yourself, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world?" "I will keep no terms with my enemies," replied the fiend. "I am miserable, and they shall share my wretchedness. Yet it is in your power to recompense me and deliver them from an evil which it only remains for you to make so great that not only you and your family, but thousands of others shall be swallowed up in the whirlwinds of its rage." A fiendish anguish animated him as he said this. His face was wrinkled into contortions too horrible to behold. But presently he calmed himself and proceeded. "But instead of threatening, I am content to reason with you. If any being felt emotions of benevolence towards me, I should return them 100-fold. For that one creature's sake, I would make peace with the whole kind. But such dreams of bliss cannot be realized. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, do not deny me my request. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. He saw my change of feeling and continued, if you consent, neither you nor any other human being shall ever see us again. I will go to the vast wilds of South America. My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves. The sun will shine on us as on man, and will ripen our food. The picture I present to you is peaceful and human. My evil passions will have fled, and in my dying moments I shall not curse my Maker. When I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. I shuddered at his threats, and the possible consequences should I refuse his demand. Yet I was also moved by the justice in his argument. His tale, and the feelings he now expressed, proved him to be a creature of fine sensations. And did I, as his Maker, not owe him all the portion of happiness that it was in my power to bestow? After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that the justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded of me that I should comply with his request. Upon my return to my home in Geneva, my haggard and wild appearance awoke intense alarm to my family, but I answered no question. Scarcely did I speak. I felt as if I were placed under a ban, as if I had no right to claim their sympathies, as if never more might I enjoy companionship with them. Yet I loved them to adoration, and to save them I resolved to dedicate myself to my most abhorred task. To my father I expressed a wish to visit England, concealing the true reasons of this request. A few months, or at most a year, was the period contemplated. In one kind, paternal precaution, my father took to ensure my having a companion. Without previously communicating with me, in concert with Elizabeth, he arranged that Clerval should join me at Strasbourg. I rejoiced that thus I should be saved many hours of lonely, maddening reflection. For myself, there was one reward I promised myself for my detested toils, one consolation for my unparalleled sufferings. It was the prospect of that day when I might claim Elizabeth and forget the past in my union with her. It was in the latter end of September that I again quitted my native country. I threw myself into the carriage that was to convey me away, hardly knowing whither I was going. I remembered only, and it was with a bitter anguish that I reflected on it, to order that my chemical instruments should be packed to go with me. I arrived at Strasbourg, where I waited 2 days for Clerval. He came. Alas, how great was the difference between us! He was alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld it rise and recommence a new day. By contrast, I was occupied by gloomy thoughts, and saw not the descent of the evening star, nor the golden sunrise reflected in the Rhine. We proceeded by sea to England. It was on a clear morning in the latter days of December that I first saw the white cliffs of Britain, and at length the numerous steeples of London. We determined to remain several months in this wonderful and celebrated city. Clerval desired the intercourse of the men of genius and talent who flourished at this time. I often refused to accompany him, alleging another engagement, that I might remain alone. I now also began to collect the materials necessary for my new creation, and this was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on the head. Every thought that was devoted to it was an extreme anguish, and every word that I spoke in allusion to it caused my lips to quiver and my heart to palpitate. After passing some months in London, we received an invitation from a person in Scotland who had formerly been our visitor at Geneva. Clerval eagerly desired to accept this invitation, but I was in no mood to laugh and talk with strangers. Accordingly, I told Clerval that I wished to make the tour of Scotland alone. "Do you," said I, "enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous. I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my motions. I entreat you. Leave me to peace and solitude for a short time, and when I return, I hope it will be with a lighter heart, more congenial to your own temper." I determined to visit some remote spot of Scotland and commence my work in solitude. I did not doubt but that the monster followed me. With this resolution, I traversed the northern Highlands, and fixed on one of the remotest of the Orkneys as the scene of my labors. It was a place fitted for such a work, being hardly more than a rock, whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable cows, and oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons, whose gaunt and scraggy limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water was to be procured from the mainland, which was about 5 miles distant. On the whole island there were but 3 miserable huts, and one of these was vacant when I arrived. This I hired. It contained but 2 rooms, and these exhibited all the squalidness of the most miserable penury. The thatch had fallen in, the walls were unplastered, and the door was off its hinges. I ordered it to be repaired, bought some furniture, and took possession, an incident which would doubtless have occasioned some surprise, had not all the senses of the cottagers been benumbed by want and squalid poverty. As it was, I lived ungazed at and unmolested. In this retreat I devoted the morning to labor, but in the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea, to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was a monotonous, yet ever-changing scene. I thought of Switzerland. It was far different from this desolate and appalling landscape. Its hills are covered with vines, and its cottages are scattered thickly in the plains. Its fair lakes reflect a blue and gentle sky, and when troubled by the winds, their tumult is but as the play of a lively infant when compared to the roarings of the giant ocean. In this manner I distributed my occupations when I first arrived, but as I proceeded in my labor, it became every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I could not prevail on myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and at other times I toiled day and night in order to complete my work. It was indeed a filthy process in which I was engaged. During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on the consummation of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went into it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. I sat one evening in my laboratory after the sun had set and the moon was just rising from the sea. Without sufficient light for my employment, I remained idle. As I sat, a train of reflection occurred to me which led me to consider the effects of what I was now doing. 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner, and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart and filled it forever with the bitterest remorse. I was now about to form another being of whose dispositions I was alike ignorant. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate, and delight for its own sake in murder and wretchedness. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not. She might refuse to comply with the compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathsome in his own deformity. Might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She might also turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him, and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. Even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children. And a race of devils would be propagated upon the earth who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. Had I right, for my own benefit, to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? Now, for the first time, the selfishness of my promise burst upon me. I shuddered to think that future ages might curse me as their pest. Who had not hesitated to buy its own peace at the price of the existence of the whole human race? My heart failed within me. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another being like to the first. Trembling with passion, I tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. I left the room, and locking the door, made a solemn vow in my own heart never to resume my labors. With trembling steps, I sought my own apartment. Several hours passed, and I remained near my window gazing on the sea. It was almost motionless, for the winds were hushed, and all nature reposed under the eye of the quiet moon. A few fishing vessels alone speckled the water, and now and then the gentle breeze wafted the sound of voices as the fishermen called to one another. I felt the silence, although I was hardly conscious of its extreme profundity, until my ear was suddenly arrested by the padding of oars near the shore, and a person landed close to my home. A few minutes after, I heard the creaking of my door, and presently I heard the sound of footsteps along the passage. I trembled from head to foot, and was overcome by the sensation of helplessness. The door opened, and the wretch whom I dreaded appeared. His countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. Shutting the door, he approached me, and said in a smothered voice, "You have destroyed the work which you begun. What is it that you intend? Do you dare to break your promise?" "Begone!" I cried. "I do break my promise. Never will I create another like yourself, equal in deformity and wickedness. I shall not in cool blood set loose upon the earth a demon whose delight is in death and wretchedness. Begone! I am firm, and your words will only exasperate my rage." The monster let out a howl of devilish despair and gnashed his teeth in the impotence of anger. "Shall each man find a wife for his bosom, and each breast have his mate, each beast have his mate, and I be alone? Are you happy while I grovel in the intensity of my wretchedness? Man, you may hate, but beware. Your hours will pass in dread and misery. You can blast my other passions, but revenge will remain. Revenge, henceforth dearer than light or food. I may die, but first you, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery. Devil, cease, and do not poison the air with these sounds of malice. I have declared my resolution to you, and I am no coward to bend beneath words. Leave me. I am inexorable." "It is well. I go. But remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. He quitted the house with precipitation. In a few moments I saw him on his boat, which shot across the waters and was soon lost amidst the waves. All was again silent, but his words rung in my ears. I burned with rage. I walked up and down my room hastily and perturbed, while my imagination conjured up 1,000 images to torment and sting me. Why had I not followed him, and closed with him in mortal strife? But I had suffered him to depart, and he had directed his course towards the mainland. I shuddered to think who might be next sacrificed to his insatiate revenge. And then I thought again of his words. I will be with you on your wedding night. That then was the period fixed for the fulfillment of my destiny. In that hour I should die, and at once satisfy and extinguish his malice. The night passed away, and the sun rose from the ocean. I walked about the isle like a restless spectre, separated from all it loved and miserable in the separation. I saw a fishing boat land close to me, and one of the men brought me a packet. It contained letters from Geneva and one from Clerval, entreating me to join him. He said that he was wearing away his time fruitlessly where he was. He besought me, therefore, to leave my solitary isle and to meet him at Perth, that we might proceed southwards together. This letter in a degree recalled me to life, and I determined to quit my island at the expiration of 2 days. Yet before I departed, there was a task to perform, on which I shuddered to reflect. I must pack up my chemical instruments, and for that purpose I must enter the room which had been the scene of my odious work, and I must handle those utensils, the sight of which was sickening to me. The next morning at daybreak I summoned sufficient courage and unlocked the door of my laboratory. The remains of the half-finished creature lay scattered on the floor, and I almost felt as if I had mangled the living flesh of a human being. I paused to collect myself and then entered the chamber. With trembling hand I conveyed the instruments out of the room. The odious relics of my work I put into a basket, with a great quantity of stones, and laying them up, determined to throw them into the sea. Between 2 and 3 in the morning the moon rose, and putting my basket aboard a little skiff, I sailed out about 4 miles from the shore. The scene was perfectly solitary. A few boats were returning towards land, but I sailed away from them. I felt as if I was about the commission of a dreadful crime. At one time the moon was suddenly overspread by a thick cloud, and I took advantage of the moment of darkness and cast my basket into the sea. I listened to the gurgling sound as it sank, and then sailed away from the spot. The sky became clouded, but the air was pure, although chilled by the breeze that was then rising. But it refreshed me, and filled me with such agreeable sensations that I resolved to prolong my stay on the water, and fixing the rudder in a direct position, stretched myself at the bottom of the boat. Clouds hid the moon. Everything was obscure, and I heard only the sound of the boat as its keel cut through the waves. The murmur lulled me, and in a short time I slept soundly. I do not know how long I remained in this situation, but when I awoke the sun had already mounted considerably. The wind was high, and the waves continually threatened the safety of my little skiff. I found that the wind was northeast, and must have driven me far from the coast from which I had embarked. Some hours passed thus, but by degrees, as the sun declined toward the horizon, the wind died away into a gentle breeze, and the sea became free from breakers. But these gave place to a heavy swell. I felt sick, and hardly able to hold the rudder, when suddenly I saw a line of high land toward the south. I resolved to sail directly towards the town, as a place where I could most easily procure nourishment. Fortunately, I had money with me. As I turned the promontory, I perceived a small, neat town, and a good harbor which I entered. As I was occupied in fixing the boat and arranging the sails, Several people crowded towards the spot. They seemed much surprised at my appearance, but instead of offering me any assistance, whispered together with gestures that at any other time might have produced in me a slight sensation of alarm. As it was, I merely remarked that they spoke English, and I therefore addressed them in that language. "My good friends," said I, "will you be so kind as to tell me the name of this town and inform me where I am?" "You will know that soon enough," replied a man with a hoarse voice. "Maybe you are come to a place that will not prove much to your taste, but you will not be consulted as to your quarters, I promise you." I was exceedingly surprised on receiving so rude an answer from a stranger, and I was also disconcerted on perceiving the frowning and angry countenances of his companions. "Why do you answer me so roughly?" I replied. "Surely it is not the custom of Englishmen to receive strangers so inhospitably." "I do not know," said the man, "what the customs of the English may be, but it is the custom of the Irish to hate villains." While this strange dialogue continued, I perceived the crowd rapidly increase. Their faces expressed a mixture of curiosity and anger, which annoyed and in some degree alarmed me. I inquired the way to the inn, but no one replied. I then moved forward, and a murmuring sound arose from the crowd as they followed and surrounded me. An ill-looking man tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come, sir, you must follow me to Mr. Kerwin's to give an account of yourself." "Who is Mr. Kerwin? Why am I to give an account of myself? Is this not a free country?" "Aye, sir, free enough for honest folk. Mr. Kerwin is a magistrate, and you're to give an account of the death of a gentleman who was found murdered here last night." I must pause here, for it requires all my fortitude to express the feelings of portent that overwhelmed me, or to properly recall the frightful events I am about to relate, which in a few moments would overwhelm me and extinguish in horror and despair all fear of ignominy or death. From the darkness that enveloped my senses, I can only construct this cold procession of facts that were unveiled to me, as if from some great detachment. Hold on, let me get a drink before we go through this. 1. That the body of a man was found on the shore, who was at first supposed to have drowned and been thrown on shore by the waves, but on examination was found to have his clothes dry and the black mark of strangulation on his neck. 2. That a woman had seen a boat with only one man in it push off from that part of the shore where the corpse was found afterwards. 3. That several men conjectured that, with the strong north wind that had arisen during the night, it was very probable that I had beaten about for many hours and had been obliged to return nearly to the same spot from which I had departed, and that the magistrate, on hearing this evidence, desired that I should be taken into the room where the body lay for interment, that it might be observed what effect the sight of it would produce on me. This idea was probably suggested by the extreme agitation I had exhibited when the mode of the murder had been described. I was accordingly conducted by the magistrate and several other persons to the inn. I entered the room where the corpse lay and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations on beholding it? I feel yet parched with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering and agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate, and witnesses passed like a dream from my memory when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me. I was spared the disgrace of appearing publicly as a criminal, as the case was not brought before the court that decides on life and death. The grand jury rejected the bill on its being proved that I was on the Orkney Islands at the hour the body of my friend was found, and after my removal I was liberated from detention. In the weeks after these heart-rending events, I had lain on the point of death with fever. My ravings, as I afterwards heard, were frightful. I called myself the murderer of William, of Justine, and of Clerval. Sometimes I entreated my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend by whom I was tormented. and at others I felt the fingers of the monster already grasping my neck, and screamed aloud with agony and terror. During this period, I had briefly recovered sufficiently to send my father the horrific news of Clerval's murder, but had spared him and Elizabeth the distressing account of the unfair accusations that were thrown against me, and the appalling effects all this had manifested upon my physical and mental conditions. It was necessary, as soon as my strength allowed, that I should return without delay to Geneva, there to watch over the lives of those I so fondly loved, and to lie in wait for the murderer. I was a shattered wreck, the shadow of a human being. I was a mere skeleton, but the fever that night and day had preyed upon my wasted frame was gone. While journeying homeward, I became more calm. Misery had her dwelling in my heart, but my pulse beat with a feverish joy when I reflected that I should soon see my sweet and beloved Elizabeth. Some softened feeling stole into my heart, and dared to whisper paradisiacal dreams of love and happiness. I don't think it is meant to be, Doctor. Upon my arrival home, the sweet girl welcomed me with warm affection, yet tears were in her eyes as she beheld my emaciated frame and feverish cheeks. I saw a change in her also. She was thinner, and had lost much of that heavenly vivacity that had before charmed me. But her gentleness and soft looks of compassion made her a more fit companion for one blasted and miserable as I was. In this state of mind, I could not delay my articulation of that which had been so long expressed between us, only in looks and warmest admiration and affection, that my dearest hopes were entirely bound in the expectation of our union. But my heart faltered, when in place of smiles and joyful acceptance of my passionate proposal, her face displayed the lines of concern and stern resolution. "My poor cousin, how much you have suffered," said she. "This winter has passed most miserably, tortured as I have been by anxious suspense. I had hoped to see peace return to your countenance, and to find your heart not totally void of comfort and tranquillity. Yet I fear that the same feelings now exist that made you so miserable a year ago, even perhaps augmented by time. Now that you have openly stated your sincere intentions, I dare not any longer postpone that which I have often wished to express to you, but have never had the courage to begin. Our union has been the favorite plan of your parents ever since our infancy. We were affectionate playfellows during childhood, and dear and valued friends to one another as we grew older. I confess to you, my friend, that I love you, and that in my airy dreams of futurity you have been my constant soulmate. But unless it were the dictate of your own free choice, and not a stifling sense of family honor that impels your proposal, there is little hope for our mutual happiness in marriage. Chase away your idle fears, my beloved girl, said I. To you alone do I consecrate my life and my endeavors for contentment. Little happiness may remain for us on earth, yet all that I may one day enjoy is centered in you. I have one secret, Elizabeth, a dreadful one. When revealed to you, it will chill your frame with horror. And then, far from being surprised at my misery, you will only wonder that I survived what I have endured. I will confide this tale of misery and terror to you the day after our marriage shall take place. For my sweet cousin, there must be perfect confidence between us. But until then, I conjure you, do not mention or allude to it. This I most earnestly entreat, and I know you will comply. Preparations were made for our wedding, which was to take place in our family's house by the lake near Bellerive. As the period fixed for the event drew near, I took every precaution to defend my person in case the fiend should openly attack me. I carried pistols and a dagger constantly about me, and I was ever on the watch to prevent artifice. Elizabeth seemed happy. My tranquil demeanor contributed greatly to calm her mind. But on the day that was to fulfill my wishes and my destiny, she was melancholy, and a presentiment of evil pervaded her. My father was in the meantime overjoyed, and in the bustle of preparation, and only recognized in the melancholy of his niece the diffidence of a bride. A large party assembled at my father's. Congratulatory visits were received, and all were a cheerful disposition. I concealed my feelings by an appearance of hilarity that brought smiles and joy to the countenance of my father, but hardly deceived the ever-watchful and nicer eye of Elizabeth. With gentle solemnity, the ceremony was performed. Those were the last moments of my life, during which I enjoyed the feeling of happiness. It was 8 o'clock. I had been calm during the day, but so soon as night obscured the shape of objects, 1,000 fears arose in my mind. I was anxious and watchful, while my right hand grasped a pistol which was hidden in my bosom. Every sound terrified me, nor can you wonder that, omnipotent as the fiend had yet been in his deeds of blood, I should almost regard him as invincible, and that when he had pronounced the words, "I shall be with you on your wedding night," I should regard the threatened fate as unavoidable. Great God! If for one instant I had thought what might be the hellish intention of my fiendish adversary, I would rather have banished myself forever from my native country, and wandered a friendless outcast over the earth, than have consented to this miserable marriage. As if possessed by magic powers, the monster had blinded me to his real intentions, and when I thought that I had prepared only for my own death, I hastened that of a far dearer victim. Elizabeth observed my agitation for some time in timid and fearful silence, but there was something in my glance which communicated terror to her, and trembling she asked, "What is it that agitates you, my dear Victor? What is it you fear?" "Oh, peace, peace, my love," replied I. "This night and all will be safe. But this night is dreadful, very dreadful." I passed an hour in this state of mind, when suddenly I reflected how fearful the combat which I momentarily expected would be to my wife, and I earnestly entreated her to retire, resolving not to join her until I had obtained some knowledge as to the situation of my enemy. She left me, and I continued some time walking up and down the passages of the house, and inspecting every corner that might afford a retreat to my adversary. But I discovered no trace of him, and was beginning to conjecture that some fortunate chance had intervened to prevent the execution of his menaces, when suddenly I heard a shrill and dreadful scream. It came from the room into which Elizabeth had retired. As I heard it, the whole truth rushed to my mind. My arms dropped. The motion of every muscle and fiber was suspended. I could feel the blood trickling in my veins and tingling in the extremities of my limbs. The state lasted but for an instant. The scream was repeated, and I rushed into the room. Oh God, why did I not then expire? Why am I here to relate the destruction of the best hope and the purest creature of earth? She was there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down, and her pale and distorted features half covered by her hair. Everywhere I turn, I see the same figure. Her bloodless arms and relaxed form flung by the murderer on its bridal bier. Could I behold this and live? Alas, life is obstinate and clings closest where it is most hated. For a moment only did I lose recollection. I fell senseless on the ground. When I recovered, I found myself surrounded by the guests. Their countenances expressed a breathless terror, but the horror of others appeared only as a mockery, a shadow of the feelings that oppressed me. I escaped from them to the room where lay the body of Elizabeth, my love, my wife, so lately living, so dear, so worthy. She had been moved from the posture in which I had first beheld her, and now as she lay, her head upon her arm, and a handkerchief thrown across her face and neck, I might have supposed her asleep. I rushed towards her and embraced her with ardor, but the deadly languor and coldness of the limbs told me that what I now held in my arms had ceased to be the Elizabeth whom I had loved and cherished. The murderous mark of the fiend's grasp was on her neck. While I still hung over her in the agony of despair, I happened to look up. The windows of the room had before been darkened, and I felt a kind of panic on seeing the pale yellow light of the moon illuminate the chamber. The shutters had been thrown back, and with a sensation of horror not to be described, I saw at the open window a figure the most hideous and abhorred. A grin was on the face of the monster. He seemed to jeer as with his fiendish finger he pointed toward the corpse of my wife. I rushed toward the window and, drawing a pistol from my bosom, fired. But he eluded me, leaped from his station, and running with the swiftness of lightning, plunged into the lake. The report of the pistol brought a crowd into the room. My head whirled round. My steps were like those of a drunken man. I was placed in a chair, hardly conscious of what had happened. My hysterical rantings led them to believe I had shot at a form conjured up by my fancy. I was bewildered in a cloud of wonder and horror. There were women weeping. My eyes wandered round the room as if to seek something that I had lost, and settled on the corpse of my beloved. Even at that moment I knew not that my only remaining friends were safe from the malignity of the fiend. Would my father find himself writhing under his grasp? Would Ernest next fall dead at his feet? A fiend had snatched from me every hope of rest or future happiness. So we will end there tonight. I know. But now we can do part 4, which I believe is the last part. Tomorrow on Halloween. I'm not sure what time yet. I've got to look at the trick-or-treaty things that are going on around Muncie and plan accordingly. You guys know you will get invitations as soon as I have an idea. Yeah. So, thank you. I know. It's getting really good. I'm going to gush for just a minute because I have tried not to, because I was doing it every single time we were together. But you guys, I am having a blast. An absolute blast. I cannot believe we have done this for, I think I looked the other day, and the first one was in April. And if it was April, it's almost November. So we have done this for at least 6 full months. That is amazing. And as long as you guys want to do this every week, I am totally in. But I need help. I'm going to need suggestions. Yeah. So find us some stories or some one-acts if you have any that you like. A one-act I will probably not read cold just because I need to have an idea how long it's going to be. So send me stuff, you guys. Jason says, I am not an animal. Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't know. I'm just, that's a pretty bold statement there, Mackie. I don't know. So yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. But as I say, I am not really sure of the time yet. But I will let you know. We have an idea about a story. Good. Send it to me. If you have a link, even better. Yeah. So we'll finish Frankenstein tomorrow. It is Devil's Night, so have a little bit of fun. Yeah. I will see you guys tomorrow. Love you.